Hello, hello, and welcome to another interview here on Your Biz, Your Rules with another one of my fabulous friends. The person that I am here to introduce you to right now is somebody who walks that magical line. She walks that line between being super grounded and super down to earth and being hella witchy, hella woo, and all up in the energetics, which, it's my favorite kind of person. So without further ado, allow me to introduce you to Rachel Foy and our amazing, deep, juicy conversation. I can guarantee that if you pay attention, if you take notes, if you implement at least one of the ideas or suggestions that we discuss in this episode, your business will change for the better. Enjoy. Welcome to Your Biz, Your Rules, the podcast for business-minded go-getters hosted by me, your favourite brain and biz coach, Daire Paddy. This is the spot for those of you ready to blend heart and head, woo and do, income and impact, change and chill, and so much more. So grab yourself a cuppa and let's get started. So Rachel, let's dive in with my favourite question of all, which is, what is a rule that you love to break in your business?
So I would like to explore the rules around launching, around the whole kind of like launch model or launch ideology. I mean, gosh, there's so many rules in terms of like that whole concept, isn't there? But I think for me, it really has now come down to this notion of these perceived rules around how we get to launch our programs and our offers and all of that kind of stuff. The more that I have really given myself permission to like break those rules, the more success I've seen. And I know that that's not, unique. I've had many conversations around that myself with sort of people and clients, but yeah, that's what I'd like to talk about. So where should we go?
So let's start by talking about some of those things that maybe were like quote unquote taught the right way.
Yeah.
That you're now currently like, no thanks.
So as soon as you said that, my head went straight to this. I'm not going to sort of mention any names because I think the thing is with rules is for some people that genuinely works for them. And I think sometimes that notion of where we go wrong, like collectively within like the industry, is we sort of take other people's, I guess, experiences on board and we try and make them ours, right? And this is where oftentimes they don't work for us because they're not meant to. So many moons ago, I remember learning a very traditional launch model, which was very kind of complex. It was very kind of painstakingly, laboriously technical, as in certain things had to happen in a certain time frame and then certain triggers. And I tried to squish my way of being into that way of launching a program. And I just found it was really stressful. I don't know whether you've done the long laborious structures of like either warming people up and then we do this and then there's a launch thing and it just, I don't know, it just wasn't fun. It was like, if this is what my business model needs to be, I don't know whether I'm going to be cut out for this. So I did learn the very traditional launch models many years ago. And like I said, it's that complex, it's just so time consuming.
And I mean, I've done that a couple of times, and every time by the end of it, I am so exhausted and so drained that the thought of actually running the program is like, oh.
And that was definitely something that was true for me, and I think it's so important, isn't it, that if we're selling our programs, offers, coaching packages, whatever it might be, like we need to be so freaking excited by the thing. And I found that these keep saying like traditional, I think everyone knows what I mean by this, but that sort of, way of launching a program, that was the experience that I had, that by the end of it, I was so fed up on my own voice. I was so sick of talking about the program. I was so fed up of, sending more emails to invite people in at the last time for the cart being open, that by the time the launch had finished, that was the energy that I was then going into the program of, oh my God, this is like, ugh. And I found that that's not the best energy to be in, obviously, for obvious reasons.
I mean, this might be shady thing to say.
Say it anyway.
Something that I've observed a lot of in the industry that we're in is that people are good marketers, or they're good like coaches, healers, practitioners, service providers. There are, of course, those unicorns that have both, that, you know, can do both really, really well. But I've noticed, like, over the span of years, this trend of putting like so much energy and so much thought and so much magic into the selling, into the promotion,
Yeah,
and not matching that in the deliverable.
yeah, absolutely. And I think we've all had experiences of that from possibly like the client side. I know that I've joined big flashy launches because the energy and the excitement was there, but then the thing that I was buying into wasn't really the thing that I got at the end of that program. And, you know, taking full responsibility for, you know, me still deciding to be in it. But yeah, you're right. And I think for me, that whole breaking that launch way, or certainly how I had been taught it years ago, has actually been a really big part of how now I allow myself to, we'll probably talk about this later, but how I allow myself to just like go with those moments of excitement or inspiration or desire. And it isn't, well, I need to do it for a certain amount of time, and then I need to open the cart, and it can only be open for 7 to 10 days. And there has to be, it's like that kind of rigidity, I think, can slow so many people down, because many of us, you know, especially the world that I tend to be in, I think you're probably quite similar. We are like the creative, inspirational, energetic sort of, you know, spiritual beings, and that sort of rigidity doesn't often work with us. So yeah, that definitely breaking that launch rule has been huge.
And I think that that idea that every launch has to be like a rinse and repeat, like you have
Oh
to.
my God.
And
So
here's the thing, like, I get how appealing that sounds, because that sounds like, oh, you only have to figure this out once and then you just do the same thing again. And that taps into that just deep desire for ease and freedom that
yeah,
so many
absolutely.
of us have.
Yeah. I mean, I did, so just sort of, you know, complete transparency now, some of those like launch models that I was taught, particularly around like the 5-day challenge model, that can work really well if you give your own flavor and spin on it. But just picking up on what you said there, I was in the headspace probably about 3 years ago when that was, I guess, what I was being shown by my coaches and being taught of, it's rinse and repeat. Once you've got your emails, you can recycle them. Once you've got your social media content, you can reuse them. And I did kind of fall into those rules for a little while of, oh, okay, it gets to be, like you said, just easy. I'm just going to copy and paste anything. What I noticed though for me is that there was genuinely no excitement there, because there was no energy being infused in the moment. It was, I'm just going to send this email because that's what I've been told I can do. And even though there was some success that I had in that rinse and repeat model, my excitement for the program that I was opening and closing, it literally went from up here to, I don't want to do this anymore. And then, like you said, you know, that's my passion. I am an online marketer, but actually my passion is I'm a healer, I'm a coach, I'm a mentor, and that's my magic. So it was sort of weighing up where my focus needs to be. And as you just rightly said, it's in the deliverable of, that's what I love to do. But yeah, that rinse and repeat concept, I can see why it does work for some people. It doesn't work for me at all.
Me neither.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that. It's so interesting though, isn't it? Because in essence, there is this idea that there is this model available where you, like you said, you can just keep recycling stuff. So you don't need to create anything new. You don't have to do anything new. It is just a plug and play. And yet I know so many people who have tried that to various levels of success, but a lot of people that I certainly know or that I've coached or worked with, it just doesn't work. And then you're kind of like, well, that's really interesting, because in essence, or in theory, it should work because it's the same thing that you're doing, yet it doesn't. So then that leads to my understanding that our energy and our enthusiasm and actually where we are in the moment when we send an email is actually more important than the email that we're sending, which is a whole different conversation. But yeah, I agree. Rinse and repeats aren't for me.
And what I'm like, because I know we've like spoken briefly about human design like outside of this, but what I'm learning about my type as a manifester is that like my fuel comes with that sort of creative jumpstart with the creation of something new.
Yes. Yeah. That's really interesting. So I'm still quite new to the world of human design. I completely ridiculed it for about 3 years. I was like, oh, that's a load of nonsense. But sometimes we're just not ready to see things. And now I'm getting deeper and deeper and deeper into this like magical world. So I'm a generator. So obviously that rinse and repeat, doing it strategically, that was never going to be my strategy. It is more about being led and responding and taking those intuitive nudges. And in hindsight, it's so funny because when I do look back on the moments when I've had like massive peaks of success, certainly revenue wise, financially, they've always been the moments when I've gone, oh, I've got an idea. I'm just going to run with it. And I've literally launched something within a week and the program has started. And they have been the moments when it has just been so easy, no stress, definitely no rules around launching anything. It's just been driven by this. I'm really excited. Does anyone want to come and play? So I think that's also been evidence for me that the breaking the launch rules is a real legit thing. And the more I can break, the better.
I think the thing that you mentioned earlier about the time scale is a big one for a lot of people.
Yeah. I think it's, again, I'm not sort of discrediting anyone who this might work for them, but I know for me personally, I think when I'm being taught, or when I have been taught that, some launch models are stretched out for like 2 or 3 months, even more, of like, warming up and then promoting this. And then you get people into webinars or video sequences, and then you start drip feeding. So it's just so complicated. And also as well, I think a big part of this breaking the launch rules for me personally is I really sat and reflected quite a while ago of like, how do I as a consumer, how do I as a consumer actually like to invest and buy things? And I'm quite a spontaneous person. Like I often do buy, again, human design, right? I buy based on how it feels and everything else. And I kind of realized that if I'm doing this long drawn out process of 2 months or 3 months, by the time the darn thing's ready to actually open and start selling, some people are going to be like, well, I wanted that 2 months ago, so I've already gone and bought it from someone else. And I think it also dilates people's excitement or spontaneity around the thing that they're selling. Now, I had a client a little while ago, amazing. She's an amazing energy healer, like coach. And she was in this container where it was being taught about launching, and their launch model is 4 months. It's a 4-month launch model from start to finish. It's like when you think 4 months is literally a third of a year. So she could only do that model 3 times a year. So the amount of pressure that she already had going into it of, well, I need this to work because I can't do it again for another 4 months. I mean, when you sort of think about it, it's not conducive, is it, to how we get to run businesses?
No, and I like thinking about people maybe who are relatively new to running a business as well. That's 3 months with no income.
Yeah.
3 months where you're not making any money, which is an insanely privileged position to be able to be in. Not everyone can do that.
Yeah. Well, the vast majority of people can't do that. So this sort of, concept about the end of the day, we are all business owners, and a business by definition is a revenue generating entity. And if those revenue generating activities are only allowed to happen every 3 or 4 months, you kind of start thinking like, in any other industry outside of the coaching industry, that just would be ludicrous and ridiculous. It's like a supermarket saying, well, we're only going to open once every 4 months and then that's it. You need to come back. So yeah, I mean, that long drawn out process around launching, I mean, just the more we're talking about this, the more I'm like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. We need to break all the rules around how this is meant to be, because it gets to be so much more simple around what some of those conventional models that are still being taught. And sometimes we have to learn that the hard way, as in experience those, as I know that you have, to realize that, well, yeah, they could work, but I don't feel like it's going to work for me. Or I kind of get the concept of why this could be effective, but surely there's a more simplified way that I get to invite people into my world, rather than it having to be this painstakingly laborious, model.
And that pressure is a killer.
Oh my goodness. I remember creating a launch years ago, again, based on this like longer launch model. And it was also that pressure of this needs to work. It's like I'm only going to open this program every, like, I think it probably would have been 3 months at the time. So every quarter, which is quite a standard launch model, isn't it? And actually having that pressure of these emails need to be perfect. I need to make sure that people are really understanding why they have to buy it now. I need to put more bonuses in to entice people in. And the more that I was in just the preparation phase of it, like you said, the pressure was building and building and building. So by the time towards the end was actually approaching, it was that exhaustion combined with stress, combined with panic of, oh my God, have I done enough? No, that ain't for me. I did that for too long, and it's just not a place that I ever want to go back to.
I just think that way of doing business, it doesn't account for life.
No, it doesn't. And also, if we kind of view it through the lens of the clients and the consumers and the people that are saying yes to stepping into our world, I don't feel that I actually want to say, I don't feel that it's fair. I have this big thing about, being a bit more fair and transparent within the industry that we represent. And a lot of those launch models, they are based a lot on quite shitty marketing tactics. Not everyone, obviously, but it is that notion of, you get all of these bonuses and that fear of missing out and scarcity marketing. And because there's a reason that those models work, if you don't buy it now, you need to wait 3 months. And actually, sometimes that can incentivize people to say yes to something, but they're in a very disempowered place when they do it, because they're buying into the fear that sometimes those launch models, I guess, create just by the general nature of how they're structured. And I don't want to be a part of that. And I know I have been a part of that in the past, and I'm always striving to do better and to be better. So I'd rather have more options for people to join my world, but in a very more empowered way. And it's not a case of, well, if you don't join now, you need to wait 3 months. It's like, and again, we might talk about this, but a lot of my things are always open, because I don't want to be incentivizing people to say yes to something when they might not be ready.
And I think that's the challenge, isn't it? Because especially now, as I think more people are becoming aware of how toxic some of these practices are, more people want to be conscious, more people want to be kind in their marketing. And at the same time, they want it to work. Like, they still want to be making money.
Yeah, absolutely. And this might be then this new area that's starting to appear, because you're right, and I've seen it and I've witnessed it, and I know we're probably in quite a few overlapping circles, that I think us as magicians, we want to kind of respect the work that we do, and we still want to be in that headspace of, well, I am still a marketer and I need to figure out how to do the marketing in a bit more of an ethical way, or a bit more of a conscious way. And it is, I guess, creating, or actually starting to see the individuality of how people are launching things now. I know when I stepped naively into the online world in, I think it was 2016 or so, which actually was kind of at the peak of some of the stuff that we're talking about. Like, everyone just did, certain things. It's not that it's not there anymore, but I think we are witnessing how just things are evolving already really quickly, and how people are finding their own way of launching. And even the word launch, I know that that's a word that we're using because everybody knows what it means, but that's not even a word I use anymore, because I don't actively launch things. I see it more as, I'm making an invitation. And I know it's just a word, but it's the intention behind it, isn't it? Now, inviting somebody to say yes, and if it's not right for them, that's totally cool. But making those invitations, as opposed to, I'm now going to go into launch mode, it's just very different. It feels a lot more soothing to the nervous system.
Yeah, and like launch mode, just the phrase, it sounds and it feels very intense.
It does, doesn't it? It feels very intense. It feels very, for me, it feels very rigid. It feels very kind of, there's a right way, there's a wrong way. It's sort of on and it's off. What other things come to mind? Just feels really heavy. And that, like you said, it doesn't always fit with life. And I remember, just as we're talking about this, I remember again years ago that I was in a launch and one of my kids got sick. It's like life happens. So suddenly I had a little one at home because they weren't obviously at school because they weren't well, wanting mummy. I was like, no, but I need to be sending out those emails and I've got to do this webinar at such a time. And like the panic. And I remember that was actually the start of me starting to really question, like, what am I actually doing? Because this is not, surely it can't be like this. Because again, quite oftentimes we see these and I guess they are quite a masculine way of doing business, which isn't right, wrong, or otherwise, it's required. But this notion of the launch model is often advocated by, perhaps it is by guys or men, or the dynamic of life and stuff might be different for them as an individual compared to somebody else, such as myself with a child at home who's sick and I had to look after them. So yeah, it's like it also needs to fit with life as well, doesn't it?
It's funny. So that thinking that if you don't listen to the nudges, then it'll like the universe will scream at you.
Yeah.
Every time I've launched over the past few years, something horrendous has happened right as I've opened the cart. And I'm talking like on the day after I opened cart, we went into the first lockdown. And then like the day after I opened cart, I caught COVID. Like immediately after, something has happened, and this has happened 6-7 times.
Oh wow!
For the past 6 or 7 launches, and I kept giving it my best shot for a while, but there comes a time where you just have to pay attention to the information you're being given and course correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think sometimes, sort of stepping into maybe more of like the mindset, belief system, energetics around that as well. There could be a part of you kind of going into coach mode now, Daire, kind of the energetics that there is actually part of you that doesn't really like this. So it's not that you're sabotaging it, but it is that whether it's universal nudges or whether actually you're creating the mirror through which your internal world already exists, but you haven't consciously seen it. And that's sort of, things going wrong when cart opens. Sometimes that is actually one of the biggest internal things for us to go, do you know what? I think there's a part of me that doesn't enjoy this, but maybe I've not allowed myself to ever consider that there's a different way, because I completely resonate with that. I used to get sick a lot around launching, like, oh no, I'm getting a really bad cold. And that was just part of my inner system going, there's a different way that you get to do this.
And it often seems to be related to losing your voice, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when you're following a model that maybe isn't of your creation.
Yeah. That I used to have years and years ago, one of my biggest, I mean, in hindsight now, it was an element of sabotage that I hadn't, or self-created sabotage. I used to lose my voice a lot, as in either completely or to the point where it was croaky that I couldn't actually speak, I couldn't do videos, I couldn't work with people, which, kind of when you use your voice so much, it is a requirement. But yeah, that was definitely true of me. And that whole like voice getting sick was often around either launching in that traditional sense, or it was shortly after it had finished. And that pattern, again, that repeated pattern of this is a bit interesting, this is a bit weird, was also another reason why I started looking at, there's something else to this, I think.
I think that recognizing your own patterns is so essential, especially when you're trying out these different systems, these different models, because, it's not necessarily all of the methodologies, all of the tactics that are inherently wrong. They'll just be things that do and do not work for you.
Yeah, and I think that's something that it's almost like a rite of passage, isn't it? I feel like we all have to experience doing things that actually don't work for us, or we invest in coaches and masterminds and groups to actually learn the lesson that that's not how I want to run my business. But I think when it comes to launching, we could argue that every single launch model actually will work, because that's true. Like if you believe that your model is going to be successful, then actually that's huge. And I think sometimes what can happen, especially if you are newer to the industry, I think sometimes we do buy into other people's beliefs. It's like, oh, this person is telling me that XYZ is going to be successful for me, so I'm going to buy into that. But it's only when you actually do it, use it, run it through your filters, your experience, your lifestyle and everything else, that you might realize that it doesn't, or maybe it does. So there's an element, like you said, that this bit's really, I love doing this bit, not too sure. And also it's about tuning in, and I guess realizing that whenever we do anything new or different, it's always stretching. It can always bring up a little bit of fear and a bit of self-doubt. Totally normal. That's not going to go anywhere. But there's a difference between that and this just feels completely wrong, or this feels completely against what I believe, or this is feeling like I'm doing the work, but I'm just dreading the fact that I need to now send another email. So it's about being, again, really conscious of these models that we can often step into, not just around launching, but specifically around the launch model.
And I think something important to add here is just because you've invested money in learning something doesn't mean you have to make it work. Like if it just doesn't work for you, let it go. Don't make it a you problem.
Yeah, I feel this could be a separate podcast, because I've got just as you said that, I'm like, I was like, so many things that, younger me absolutely did that, invested. I remember investing at the time, it was a significant amount in something, kind of whatever, don't need to say the details, and I did try and make it work for such a long time after, because I'd invested the money, I'd spent the money, I'd paid, whatever it was at the time. This has to work. This needs to work. And yeah, you're right. So making it a me problem was actually the problem. And I think this is a big part of breaking those rules, isn't it? It's recognizing that sometimes what we actually invest our money in, we actually get the lesson, and the learning is to realize that that's not right for us. And, even recently, like last year, I did that. I invested in something, in a mastermind, for me to realize that actually the way that they're teaching business is totally not what I want to do. But I've paid money to learn that lesson, and I'm so grateful for it. So it's not a me problem. I'm not making it mean anything. I've just learned a really valuable lesson that was, it cost financial something, and that's actually okay. So yeah, not making it personal is huge, and not always easy though, is it?
Definitely not always easy.
No, it's not always easy. But there we go.
So to wrap up this conversation, I would love to ask you, what is a book that has changed the way you think? Any book?
Oh my goodness. I am reading again, Psycho-Cybernetics. Have you read that one? It's
on my list, but I haven't
read it. Is it?
Yeah.
It's not a light book. It's not something that you just kind of read and, you're not really paying it. Like, you need full attention. Maxwell Maltz, name always jumps out of my head. Psycho-Cybernetics. I probably read that book quite a lot of times, and it's one of those books that every so often I get this desire to pick it back up again, and it's all around how our shifting of our self-image, so the inside work, is how we literally change everything on the outside. And I think that's one of those lessons in life and business that is arguably always going to be there. People talk about up leveling and stepping into that next version. And that's that book really that explains it in a really just phenomenal way. So highly recommend it if you haven't already read it.
Okay, well, I will add it to the Your Biz, Your Rules bookshelf, so everyone can go ahead and check out that link in the show notes. But you've definitely sold it to me.
There you go. Let me know how you find it. It's a fascinating book.
I will do. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rachel. And everyone listening, Rachel is going to be back next week in another episode for even more of the good stuff. So make sure you tune in.
See you later.
Thank you for listening to Your Biz, Your Rules. I know that we all like to listen to podcasts, watch videos, read articles or books or posts on Facebook, and not really do anything with that information. So I want to challenge you right now. I want to challenge you to take something from this episode, anything, and use it to spark action. Use it to activate some kind of change in the way you work and the way you live. Do yourself this service today. And tell me all about it on Instagram. Hop over, shoot me a DM, or share an Instagram story showcasing what action you are taking thanks to this episode. And of course, do all of the usual things. Subscribe, leave a review, Let me know how much you love the show, and I will be back with you next week.